everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits and welcome to the first night of the 2025 Spring Miniskein mini-series, or SMSMS. Every night of this series, we're going to be exploring different ways to dye up sets of 5 or 6 different colors of yarn, where we have these 20-gram mini skeins that you can use together in one project. And we're going to do this with a lot of different types of colors and techniques, and the whole thing is a lot of fun. For tonight's video, we're actually going to revisit something that I did in my Hanukkah special in 2024. Where we're going to create a rainbow lasagna. The lasagna technique is one where I layer yarn and dye with more yarn and more dye and more yarn and more dye to dye up the yarn. Now this can be a great way to get consistent variegated results. You're adding the dyes cold, you can spread it out. But for Hanukkah, I dyed each layer with a different color, but my pan was not big enough to hold all of the dye and yarn that I wanted to use. So I got a deeper pan. I have a new 6-inch pan. So now we can finally play around with the entire rainbow of yarn, all in one pan. So the plan is to use 6 colors of Dharma acid dyes. We have Fire Engine Red, Blazing Orange, Brilliant Yellow, Emerald Green, Sapphire Blue, and Electric Violet. And so we're gonna layer these, the yarn, the red dye, more yarn, the orange dye, more yarn, the yellow dye, and so on until we can expose what type of colorways we could create and set we end up with. But now let's go take a look at the 20-gram mini skeins we're gonna be dyeing up for our first round tonight. I'm actually gonna use 6 different yarn bases, which from this angle, they all look really similar. But we have Wool to Dye for Platinum DK, Diamond Sock, Shiela Sparkle or Glitter, whichever one has a silver stellina, Titanium Sock, Crazy8 DK, and then a Superwash MCN High Twist. All of these yarns are mostly Superwash merino wool. And then they have either nylon, silk, cashmere, and or stellina, depending on them. But before I pre-soak things, you may notice a little bit, even though I messed up my grid over there, I have all these in batches of 6. I could have done a set of 5 colors, but I wanted to use all 6 colors of the rainbow to really do this justice. So we have 10 sets of 6 20-gram mini skeins. So however many grams of yarn that is. I mean, each layer of color is going to have 200 grams of yarn. And then we have 6 of those. So 1.2 kilograms total. Here is our color palette today. We're going to use Fire Engine Red, Blazing Orange, Brilliant Yellow, Emerald Green, Peacock Blue, and Electric Violet. Now, I'm going to try to use more red. Not that I remember exactly how much I used, but I'm going to use a bit more of the red than I think I need, and maybe go a little bit lighter on the yellow. That's sort of my gut right now. But I'm just so curious to see how things are gonna blend. And fingers crossed it's beautiful. Here is one of my 4-inch deep pans. And here is the brand new 6-inch deep pan that I've never used. I am so excited. And like, I know the difference between 4 and 6 is a difference we can all understand. It's 50% more. But it just feels so much bigger to me. Oh man. I am going to quickly rinse this out because it has just been sitting on my shelf and is a little dusty. So it will be a little bit damp. And just so you know, all the yarn we're going to dye today fits technically in the 4-inch pan. It would be very, very crowded, but I'm confident that I can get everything to fit with enough water in the 6-inch pan. There's no acid in any of the yarn. I just squeezed out a lot of the pre-soak water. And since we're going to use dry dye powders, I will be wearing my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves. I considered adding some dye down before adding our first layer of yarn, but with the first layer, we can always flip things. And I also realized at some point yesterday that I think I used some of my
9-inch zip ties instead of all of my 12-inch ones. I'm gonna rotate it to keep the zip ties down there. I do have a yarn mop just off camera that we'll use for excess dye. But for now, I added maybe 6 cups of water, which is a little heavy, but we're gonna add some plain tap water with each layer so that way we can work the colors through. Now, even though I want to use more of the Fire Engine Red than what I used when I dyed Hanukkah, maybe like, I don't know, 6 months ago is when I actually dyed it, I'm still wanting to spread the dye out because I don't want it to clump on the yarn. And if I add like too much dye in spots, then, well, that could be an issue. But okay, I'm layering the dye. One of the things I do for safety is I always cover the dye jars when I'm done applying it. And I also don't go in with wet hands. Now, you can see that right now we have a color that is red, but it is a light red. And some colors, even with not adding no acid, will start striking to the yarn pretty quickly. As I mentioned, this is the only color that I'm planning on flipping during this whole process. But you can see that there's a lot of red in the water. Now, and now here I am before drying my hands, wiping my hands on a yarn mop. Now we are likely to have dye left on the edges, and so we may get transfer between layers that way, and honestly I'm okay with it. But I just know I wanted to pump up the volume of this color, and then when we get to the yellow, we'll do a little bit less. So for most colors, I will dye the yarn, work it through, and then add a little bit more dye before adding the next layer. And the blue and purple seem to strike a little bit faster than what I've seen with the yellow, orange, and red. But this time we're going to have everything in one pan, so I'm very excited about that. Now, part of the pushing motion that I'm doing here, and don't worry, we will add acid eventually. You do need acid to dye yarn with acid dyes. This still doesn't feel that red. It feels very pastel. I'll do one more round. I lost track of what I was saying. But the reason why we do things cold with no acid to start is because we want to work the colors through. We want them to be able to spread out on our yarn. But in doing this technique, if there was acid in here, the colors would strike faster where they've been placed. And there are definitely colors that I've used that will strike really fast even with no acid on anything. Now, Fire Engine Red is honestly a color I have not used that much. On camera, it looks very orange. I'd say it is a bit more orange than, say, Cherry Bomb or something, but it does have some red to it. And okay, I feel like I've done a lot more of this color than I'll probably do with the others, but now I'm speckling more of this dye on before we add our next layer. And then as for that dye on my fingertips, I can just go ahead and tap that in, just so that way I don't end up with like a super saturated color mark. Maybe we will end up with a saturated mark. That's the same. Yep, it's saturated on the yarn mop. It is what it is. That's why I choose a mop. But now I'm going to come over. I'll separate the bundles first with our next layer of yarn and add this in. And because these are mini skeins versus full skeins, things are shorter, and I'm able to conceivably get a little bit more separation in there, but you can see that things are bunched. Each layer may be bunched in a slightly different way. I forgot, I want to work this through first, get a feel for the water level, and also to dissolve that dye that we have in the middle. And so the color that is coming up here, you could see red coming when I press, but it is lighter than what we had seen on the previous round. But the orange may push through a lot as well. I'm going to add a little bit more water. We have 8 cups in here total right now. And now I'm coming in with the blazing orange, which is a color that I find looks a little bit more fawn and fox-like versus a bright, like flame orange, until it has time to like dissolve, maybe even come in contact with acid. So it is a color that will brighten up with time. But I don't know if I'm gonna need to do multiple layers of this color, but right now, and see, this is what I remember from last time, it doesn't feel like things look any different. I think it's also a color that disappears a little bit at first. But yes, I'm seeing things look noticeably more and more yellow as I give it a minute. I think I will work that color through one more time before adding some on and doing the next layer. And I'm basing the amount of dye that I'm adding a little bit from experience and a little bit from just looking and seeing what's happening. But I remembered that the difference between these two colors, and maybe I can pop one up from something I shared this March, the difference between the two colors is very striking. You can tell the difference between them. It's just sometimes things look a little bit subtle. I'm barely seeing it on the yarn mop. Okay, now I want to add a little bit of dye before we add the next layer of yarn on. And this is something that I won't do with the yellow, but I'll probably do with the other colors. It's just the yellow I've found, it's ironic because the yellow is a color that both can get taken over super easily. I'm like, I don't think we're gonna see yellow in the final product pretty much at all. But what we will see is instead of seeing yellow, we're gonna see orange and some green notes in there instead of actually seeing that yellow color, if that makes some sense. So the last time I let the wrinkles kind of be along the top, I think this time I'm gonna let it be a little more in the middle. Mainly because I know that this is going to stack and have more sort of stacked up at that top edge. But now that we've added the yarn, we can work this through. And you can see that there's not that much color here. And you can see that we can also see some of the orange label on the sides. So some of the yarn may get some yellow directly on top of that past layer. Some may not. But at this stage, when I'm not pressing down, you can really, really see the yarn high above the surface. And so this is my indication that I need more water. Because if I were going to go and take this as is and go heat it, I would be nervous about that amount of water going on the stove. And so maybe I've added another 5 cups in here right now. But you can see just like how much less compressed the yarn is at this stage. We can see some water at the edges. And I mean, eventually this is something that we'll think about as well. Let's go in with the yellow. And so we're coming up on the transition that we haven't seen before. Because at Hanukkah, I did this where we did red through yellow, and then we did yellow through purple. And so one colorway was very subtle, transition was very subtle, and then the other had a little more punch. And I know I said I was only going to do one layer of the yellow, but I feel like I haven't added that much yet. So we can always do more. I'm going to see how things feel as I start mixing it in, and clearly things are looking more golden orange. And this is why I can say, I mean, when I press down, things are looking fairly yellow. But this is why I can say, okay, we are not going to have, where's that clump? We want to dissolve any clumps, I find. But that's why I'm like, we're not really going to have any yellow in the project, because as soon as I add the yellow, it has blended. Which honestly is making me consider taking a second yarn mop for the second color. Even though this will be very similar to mops I did around Hanukkah. But I think I may do that. We'll see. Oh my gosh, I almost went into the orange. Because you see, I forgot where I was. Okay, you know what I'm going to do? Even though I said I wasn't going to do this, I'm not going to work more yellow through on this particular layer. But I am adding the yellow, and then we'll add our next layer on. Now, one thing I probably could have done, I just want to dissolve a little bit of that in there. One thing I probably could have done with this whole colorway and this whole entire project is pre-measure out all of the colors. I could have measured out, say, 1 gram of each color and decided that that was the proportion that I wanted for this whole project. But you know what? We didn't do that, and I feel like we have a good reason for not doing that, just as we have a good reason to do that. The reason to do that, and you can see this is way, way more yellow than what we had before. This is way more gold. I mean, we're going to add green on top of this, so this pretty gold color. There's some elements that do feel a little bit yellow, but you can see there's still a lot of orange in the water. And we're going to go to the green. Let's add a little bit of water on and grab our emerald green dye, which is a very potent color and a color prone to spreading. So this could go down multiple layers. I don't know, because I haven't done this exactly yet. I'll go light at first because we can always add more. Now, if I had measured out all of the colors, that both would have helped me, because I'm like, okay, we could end up with like a 1-to-1-to-1-to-1 ratio of everything. But different colors have different amounts of pigment. And so 1 gram of yellow mixed with 1 gram of red won't give us a perfect orange that's in the middle, right? And so that is a reason why things may not work out quite that way. Now, at first when I'm mixing, I'm going light. I'm not pushing down through many layers yet at all. Just at first. But now I am. And so these layers are going to act a little bit like a sponge. Because as I push and release, some of this color is going to get soaked through these other layers and may or may not shift things. Oh, I forgot I wanted a second yarn mop. Good thing I had one pre-soaked. Okay, and I'm going to add more green. We can see some very fall orange notes behind it, and I'm very, very excited by that. The thing about doing a, quote, yarn lasagna like this with a different color on every layer is that we're going to get a reveal moment in the end, very similar to how we might get a reveal with any kind of tie-dye. How you may have like some idea of what's going to happen, but depending on where you place the color, how you fold the shirt, you can get variation. Okay. And once again, I'm going a little shallow at first. And there is so much green in here that I'm considering not adding too much more in between this and the next layer. Just because this color feels so dark, and I know a lot of this is going to come up on the blue, but I've done it for every other color. So we may as well do it here. And of course, when I'm adding color on the intermediate layer before I add more yarn on, and I really, really did not add too much here at all, that can absolutely influence what is going to happen on the next layers as well. Because if there's only powder here and here and here, maybe that means we get something asymmetric. And how the yarn, because the yarn can't go completely straight, so how and where it's folded across that previous layer can make a difference in how the colors come through as well. And I mean, I'm trying to lay things out as evenly as I can. The nice thing with doing a single color on each layer is that I feel like I can move the yarn once I put it down. If I'm doing a lasagna with something that's more variegated, I don't want to push things as down as far, because if I do, or once I put it down, I don't want to move it, because then I can move like a navy section onto a red section, and that may not be what I want. Now, what's really interesting on this layer is I'm not feeling as much of the like dirty orange notes. There's a hint that I can see down there at the edge, but just like we filter as we press down, we filter the other direction as well. Like the colors that are down below are being filtered as we press down and release. I am no longer keeping track of the water that I've added, but we need the water there to mix the colors through. Okay, it's peacock blue time. Doo-doo-doo. Which is a deep blue. We could have done this with like a pink, like a magenta cyan kind of rainbow, but it's fun to do things. Ooh, actually, it would be really fun to do a lasagna like that. Depending on how this comes out, maybe I should do another one. Dissolving it lightly at first. Ooh, so pretty. Definitely gonna need more blue. No, but what I was saying is that maybe we need to do a lasagna where we start with, say, magenta. Do a magenta layer. Then do a layer in between where I don't add any dye. Or maybe a layer where I add both some magenta and some yellow. You know, and sort of blend the colors on the yarn that way. Because I have a rough feel of the proportions for mixing those colors. So for example, on the magenta layer, I would do just magenta. Then on the magenta layer, I would do only magenta. On the next layer, I would do a little bit of magenta, but a lot more yellow to give us the orange. Then obviously I would do just the yellow. And then more yellow than blue for the green layer. Just the Caribbean blue. And then more pink than blue for the purple layer. Now, you'll notice this is how much the green is having an impact. We have a lovely teal here, but I've added 2 rounds of the blue so far, and this is still very, very green. And I definitely have a little bit of green on the orange yarn mop and a little bit of orange on the green yarn mop. I forgot that they have no acid in each other yet. That's fine. This color is very pretty. I feel like everything is going to be very fall leaves right now. I'm curious then where the purple will bring it, because I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of orange, conceivably some browns in the middle, and then the purple is going to be dark. So it may not feel rainbow. It may feel more fall / sunset. Because even on the yarn mop right now, it's almost all green, except for where I'm now adding this blue on. And you can see it is really a blue. It's just, our green has taken over. Now the nice thing is here we are with our final layer of yarn, and we have tons of space in the pan, which feels really, really great. Now, I know that emerald green and royal purple mix beautifully, and the green and purple yarn mop I did last time was gorgeous as well. And so it's just so funny that the blue, maybe once there's acid it'll make a little more of an impact, but right now not so much. Oh, but look at this layer, right? We do have more blue greens, but then look at that like more olive green that's coming through around the zip ties. That's really, really fun. I hope that you guys are happy that I'm doing this more real time versus switching to a voiceover, even if my stream of consciousness may get disconnected at times. Oh, my little monologue here. That's the one perk of doing a voiceover, but I have to say that reacting real time is pretty nice as well. Now, so far, things are feeling very similar to how they did last time. And last time on this upper one, we did have a mixture of yellows with purple because of the way everything came together there. Now, what we didn't have is our purples going down and mixing on those oranges and stuff. So those bottom layers are what I'm expecting to look the most different. This color that is on top feels very dark, and it's so funny because I'm feeling so much more blue in this layer right now, or it's almost a little gray, but it's very, very beautiful, very peacock. This could be a fun way to do a layered tonal as well. I'm not talking about a different color on each layer of the yarn, but layer a little bit of powder, work it through, and then do that sort of on repeat with your different layers. I don't think I've done that specifically to create a layered tonal using the powders. I've certainly done that with liquids, but not with powders. And so I think doing like a yellow, a peacock blue, and the electric violet like that could be really, really pretty and give like a nice muted color. And I feel like the violet is giving us some of the most dimension of all the colors at this point. I want to peel back the layers so much. But we do have resist in here from the way the yarn is, from the way the colors are in here. And so I just feel like we're going full-on mystical forest, and I'm here for it.
On camera, I feel like this looks very overexposed right now. I mean, look at how light my skin looks. I think this is a little bit more accurate to what I'm seeing in person. Like, we have a dark, it doesn't feel very purple, it's much more navy, but then there's hints of this like army green down at the ends, and I'm here for it. This is giving mystical forest, this is giving such a pretty feel to it all. Now I am going ahead and adding a fair amount more water right now. And as I press and lift, hopefully I'm not going to regret adding this much right now. But you can see that the yarn is definitely floating a little bit more. I don't want to press on it too much because I really don't want to alter what's happening. We will certainly be pressing it when we come and add acid eventually and working that through. For now, I'm not going to move anything. For now, I'm going to go ahead and let this sit as it is for 30 minutes. This is more for superstition reasons. I could go ahead and add acid right now, but there is a chance that with no acid, just the slightly acidic pH that my tap water has, the colors might start binding a little bit slowly, and things would happen faster for sure once I add some vinegar. So I'm gonna let this sit. We have a good amount of water in here, but I don't want to burn anything. So we're gonna be very, very patient, and I'll see you in 30 minutes. It's been 30 minutes, and I'm so curious about how much of this color has gone down below. I don't know what that color even is. It has a greenish tinge to it though. All right, let's add some acid. We're gonna do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tablespoons of white vinegar to start. That may seem like a lot, but given that we have probably at least 24 cups of water in here, I will probably be adding even more acid, but this is just a starting place. Now I am a little concerned that I added so much water, just because I know that that is gonna move colors through more, and actually, I don't know if you guys are seeing what I am seeing, but a lot of color struck just from that addition to acid. The water is absolutely more green than it was just a minute ago. Okay, let's do 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's another 3 tablespoons because that's what I had. And again, I'm gonna work this through. Now we have a reasonable amount of water in here. So like when I push everything down, there's a lot of water at the surface. That makes me feel a little more comfortable. Whoop, I moved that, I didn't mean to go and start heating things up. Oh, you can see some orange baking there. Sometimes I might like to wait and let things sit after adding acid, but I'm going to very carefully bring this over to the stove and turn on the heat on low. Oh my God, it's heavy. Things are looking way more teal green now than they did before I added acid. So that's a little interesting to me. I am happy with how much space we have left in here. It really does feel like that purple disappeared. Oh man. Part of me wants to look. Part of me wants to add more. Part of me wants to realize that that purple did feel like it was there before, even though it was very, very green before as well. Is what it is. I'm not gonna add more dye right now. What I am gonna do is keep that heat on low. I don't have a lid for this. I could cover it with tin foil, but that's not what I'm gonna do right now. I'm gonna set a timer for 30 minutes while we start to slowly heat it up. I do not think in that time that we will get to a boil, but I think, and then I will add more water to here. So we're gonna be patient, and I'll see you in 30 minutes. And again, the heat is on low. Sometimes in pans I might have it on high to heat things up, but I'm gonna be very, very careful with this here today. And I just love that little orange peeking through. I'm still like, where did all the purple go? But things are getting warmer and a little steamier. And ooh, check that out. Our dye bath is pretty clear. Now, I don't think it's that warm actually. It's warm, but not hot at the edges. So here I have a lot of water that had a huge splash of white vinegar in it. And I'm bringing it over. Not even adding all of it, just to make myself feel better and more confident. I don't want anything to burn. Now, be careful sticking your hands into a hot bath. Please, please, please. But I just want to make sure, and I don't want to reveal anything happening on the bottom. I just don't want things to compressed at the bottom because I don't want anything to burn. I have never burnt yarn, but I did burn something on a pan recently. I'm going to add the rest of that water. And I think I'm going to continue to keep the heat on low for 30 to maybe 45, 50 or 50 minutes. Or maybe we'll heat for 30 minutes and then turn things off and let it cool in the pan. You have options for sure, but I'll check in after 30 minutes. We don't need to be at a rolling boil. Seeing some steam is good. Being just below a boil is great. All right, it's been another 30 minutes. We are steamy. I saw some bubbles over there, and I know things were warm before, but we're gonna turn off the heat. With this much yarn in here, I am not taking chances. And again, I have never burned yarn, but I've also never had over 1 kilogram of yarn in one pan. I think the max I've ever had is 800 grams. I mean, things are going well, and I think it's gonna take a really long time for this to cool. I expect it might take a couple of hours. Now, I don't need to leave it in here to cool completely, and I could remove some of the yarn now, but longer exposure to heat isn't a bad thing. So I'm gonna let this cool for a couple of hours, then we will reveal the layers. Now we do have these last 2 yarn mops that technically have no acid on them yet. So I'm gonna take some white vinegar, pour a little bit onto each skein, and then I'm literally just gonna pick it up and squeeze. And you can see that maybe, well, it's steamy because I'm on top of the steamer basket. Maybe there's a hint of some yellow, but most of the color really has stayed put on this yarn already. But I do want to steam set it. So I'm going to steam set it for 30 minutes, then I'll remove it and wash this yarn off camera. It is amazing how small amounts of colors can really stick to the yarn before you've even added acid. Okay, it's been a couple of hours. Let's go ahead and remove layers. Ooh, that color is so pretty up there. All right, our top layer. I would say we've got more hints of blue, but it's definitely very green. I'm curious if it's gonna feel distinct from this layer, which, ooh, look at that bit of orange peeking through. This layer feels almost more blue, but I'm not really that sure. I mean, they're similar, but definitely not the same, but they're definitely similar. Now this layer is definitely, whoa! This layer is definitely more green. I would say definitely more yellow. Don't forget that this is the layer, I guess, that had green on top and yellow on the bottom. Look how fall that is. Oh my gosh. Okay, and then look at these green, ooh. Oh, this is so cool. Definitely not quite what I was expecting, but we've got notes of green. It is fall. We have a very mystical forest colorway. Oh my gosh. Okay, now this is the layer that had the, ooh, look, we've got some red notes coming through. Oh, it's like we're going from like the depths and shadows of the forest up to the leaves at top. Not what I expected, but that's okay. And I love that we've got hints of like the deep color on here, that it's not completely solid. And look at all the color absorbed. So this is so interesting to me. And the color progression goes sort of like that. The reason why this is interesting is that there's elements here that are like the top color when we dyed the yarn, the yellow to the green pan. But the orange notes and the green notes absolutely dominate. And it's just funny that the yellow dominated colors are the ones that are the most impactful here. And this colorway is so fun and pretty, and I honestly expected to feel more purple and blue at the top, but I'm not mad at it. I love it. I don't think I could have designed this as pretty as it turned out. Now, things are basically cool, but I'm gonna let them finish cooling before we go and wash it. And as for our 6-inch pan, I mean, the water is clear, so that's always wonderful, but it held up so well, and I am extremely, extremely happy. Let's wash our yarn. You know, I have blended secondary colors together in the past. Specifically, I think the orange, maybe it wasn't electric violet, but maybe it was. Maybe it could have been royal purple, but I did I'm pretty sure it was blazing orange and emerald green. And I'll pop a picture of that up on the screen. I'm gonna add some dish soap to this. And so while I have an idea of how they blend, I still want to play around more with orange and green and see the combinations we get, because yes, we've got some muddy tones in here, but there's very little that feels actually brown. It all like works in a gorgeous, gorgeous autumn way. Oh man, I wonder where this would have ended up had I not done the blue and the purple at all. Now the great news is that we're not seeing any color bleeding, and that's with 600 grams of yarn getting washed right now. Now, if I dye another lasagna with these colors, and I think I probably will be, there may be a time lapse after this. I don't know if the proportions of things will end up being the same. This colorway seems very bright towards the bottom with those like tomato red colors, and then gets a lot more muted once we bring in the greens and everything else. But oh my gosh, this is beautiful. So I've done a lasagna before with various like blues, pinks, and yellows to see how those blended together. But I haven't done that with me specifically blending the hues on different layers, like I think I spoke about a little bit as I was working on this project. Sort of like I'm mixing with powders that classic rainbow. And the thing is, if I were to do that, I could measure out the dye powders that I was using for each level based on the proportions I use when I want to mix, like the quote classic rainbow. And I honestly wonder how that would end up. Because of those three primary colors, the pink strikes pretty fast, the other two colors don't. So I think that it would go in a different direction from what we have here, but oh, I am so happy with this colorway. It certainly is not spring-like though. But we had to try it and we ended up with something completely magical. But again, if/when I do a version of this colorway again, it could end up being completely different or extraordinarily similar. But now I'm going to put all the yarn through the spin dryer and hang it up to dry. To translate this miniskein yarn lasagna into sock blanks, I had to figure out how to best fold the fabric so that way I could create layers. Yes, I could have done this with 6 completely separate sock blanks, but given that we're going to have a miniskein set and I'm trying to recreate something similar to that set, I think folding 2 blanks so I would have 6 layers of fabric might work well, but it also could turn out completely differently. I pre-soaked these sock blanks that are 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, in plain tap water with no acid overnight. And I was a little worried about trying to get a water volume in here so that way I could spread out the colors, but without blending them completely because there's space in the pan where water could go. So I popped the yarn mop into the same pan so that way I could help soak up extra liquid and sort of added liquid as I felt like it was needed with the dyes, really feeling things out as I went along. In general, this folding each blank into thirds and having a layer on each worked well, except I wish I had a smaller pan where I was doing this. Because I realized that at one point I was going to have to put the blank over where I had the yarn mop there to soak up liquid that came out, and I had to come up with something very impromptu, moving the yarn mop eventually onto the counter. It was just not as well thought through as I could have done. But at least the colors and the layers of the blank seemed to be working pretty well. Now, one other concern I had while doing this is that unlike a whole layer of yarn, like a whole full skein layer, or having 2 full skeins on each layer, which has then multiple layers of yarn to go through, each layer of the blank doesn't have that much yarn to go through. It is a lot thinner, it's a lot easier to push things through, and even there's holes where like dye powder can go through more. So it's possible everything in this is going to blend together completely, but we don't really know. I added a couple of tablespoons of white vinegar on top of the blanks immediately after I was done adding the dye. And then I waited about 20 more minutes before bringing over more acid, working the colors through. I have to decide still how I want to heat set this, because if I add a ton of water into here, I don't know if that'll go well, but also I'm gonna have to squish things differently if I'm gonna steam set. So I may end up letting this sit all afternoon on the countertop and then steam setting it later on once it looks like all that color has absorbed and any water I push through the blanks looks clear. Please let me know down in the comments how you would heat set this. Around an hour or so after I added more acid and let things sit, I brought over even more acid and more water because I decided that I would go ahead and immersion heat set this on the stove. Yes, there was a little bit of color still moving out from the blank, but since most of the color was sort of locked into place at that point, I felt like this was the easiest way to heat set things. Because if I moved the blank and put it in a steamer basket, I would be scrunching it and we could get color transfer that happened from the steam setting versus the lasagna setup in the first place. I heat everything for 30 minutes and then turn off the heat to let things cool for a bit before removing both our sock blanks and the yarn mop to go wash off camera. Here is the dry yarn, all of the dry yarn that we dyed, and we have a really lovely color progression here. I'm really excited to see how this progression is going to translate onto each individual mini skein set, because there's definitely variation in the colors we have within one bundle. Like here I see a more purple note, and then on some of these I see more orange. So hopefully we'll feel this kind of range in the full sets. Before I go start twisting things, there are two other things we need to look at. Well, maybe three, but two main ones. Here are the yarn mops I created while dyeing these colorways. We have a beautiful pastel cool toned yarn and a more warm toned one because I split the colors onto these two mops. And I think they turned out really pretty. Not very related to the rest of the colorway because ultimately the tones in here are much brighter, but that's because we didn't mix all 6 colors together on one of those mops. The next thing I need to show, which turned out quite different, are the double-stranded sock blanks. And from here especially, things are a little bit overexposed. You can really see the lines where things were folded, which is amusing me a lot. And the other thing that's really interesting to me right now is one of the blanks definitely is more blue, the other has more purple, which is telling me that this is the blank that was on the very top of that stack. A lot of the coloration in here feels almost like an oil slick. It is really, really beautiful. And if I am gonna unravel one of the blanks, I'll insert some footage in here and compare it next to a similar set of yarn that I dyed in our mini skein lasagna. Clearly the sock blanks are significantly more saturated. In our sock blank lasagna, I was only dyeing 200 grams of yarn versus the 1.2 kilograms when I was dealing with the mini skeins. But since each layer was so thin, there wasn't as much space for that dye to go. And so I think that that blended things more, but in a way that I think is really, really cool. I love the oil slick effect that we have here, which ultimately is similar to some of those effects that we get with the color on our yarn here as well. It's just we had more dye here. Now, could I do something with blanks that is similar to the lasagna effect overall? Sure, I could have dyed 6 sock blanks, one each a different color, but I was hoping to evoke a similar woodsy gradient here, and I think that one other thing that this really showed is that when you're not measuring the amount of color, you can get feels that are a little bit similar and maybe there's some relation, but because the proportion of each color on each layer may have been different on the mini skeins versus the sock blanks, they don't feel that similar. And so if I went and did a whole second mini skein lasagna now, weeks after doing the first, I bet it would feel different and the colors would not be identical, just because I don't have that measurement of the amount of dye that I added on each layer. Oh, and that yarn mop we got with the sock blanks is more brown, and honestly it's more related to what we have with the mini skeins because of the way the colors all blended in there. but I think it's really, really gorgeous and I adore it. One last thought before I go to start twisting up the minis. I really wonder what would happen if I tried to do a lasagna like this, but I used liquid dyes instead of dye powders. One perk of using liquid dyes is I could have a better sense of how much dye I was adding on each layer, but a negative is that I would be adding more volume each time, and because the dyes are already dissolved, with some pigments it would be harder to work those colors through. One of the perks of using dry powders on a lasagna like this is that after you add the powder, you start dissolving them in place, and that works them through more than you can do sometimes if you're adding liquid dye. Even with no acid, liquid dyes don't always go all the way through a layer. So, lots of things to think about, and please let me know down in the comments what kinds of things you would like to see moving forward. Here we have one of our sets of mini skeins laid out to show the gradient next to the bit of a gradient we have on the sock blanks. And unlike some other examples in this series, this is not the best one for me to do a when you want to use mini skeins versus a sock blank to make some kind of fade or gradient example, because they're so different. But overall, this is a technique of a surprise result in the end anyway, versus having a planned out fade set or gradient set of yarn. Still very fun and pretty though. This is technically a set of 12 right here, and I'm bringing out just this sock yarn. This is the titanium sock, just to show off a little bit the similarities and differences between two minis that were in the quote same level. And for example, on this one right here, we've got a little bit of orange there and not so much right here. So, and actually a set of 12 could work pretty nicely in some ways with this colorway. But anyway, these two sets of 6 that are on the exact same yarn base do feel pretty balanced compared to one another. Here are the 10 sets, and I would say things look pretty darn close across our different yarn bases. Because we have stellina blends, superwash merino nylon blends, superwash merino, superwash MCN, a superwash merino silk blend, and then all the way at the end is our 75-25 sock. And yeah, I would be hard pressed to point out real differences between them. I think the only one that is standing out at all as being different is our silk blend here. I mean, if we compare superwash merino or superwash merino silk blend, the silk blend is visibly less saturated, which is consistent with these comparisons we do all the time. Now, again, to be fair, this was all dyed at the same time. It's very possible that some skeins had more dye on them than others, because actually here is our other silk one, and maybe it's a hair darker than that one. So there are differences in there between different yarn bases, even within the same level of our lasagna. I have done lasagna techniques with a lot of consistency, but the very key element to that consistency is that I'm dyeing the yarn usually on the same day. I'm dyeing those colorways on the same day where I have the muscle memory. And yes, then there might be some batches that have more color or less color, but the other, I guess, element is usually in those circumstances, I'm doing the same color progression on each layer. I think that when I'm doing a different color on each layer, it's going to be a lot harder for me to have that muscle memory and to be consistent from pan to pan. Of course, there are ways I could be more consistent, and that would be to have 2 pans set up at the same time. And if I was going back and forth between each pan with something like this, then I would be able to have more consistency. But since I'm not peeling back the layers while I'm in the middle of one lasagna, that means that I don't have a good feeling on what's going on beneath the surface and how that compares to what I dyed in the previous round. So I hope that makes sense. I was just so nervous that the sets we were going to end up with here today were going to feel like there was a big gap in between the colors. I was afraid that, just like the Hanukkah example I showed, we were going to feel a big gap in between our yellow and green. But because the green and the yellows spread so much, we have a nice blend. And the other thing I'm happy about is that we do have a clear progression. Like these two are very similar, but there are differences, and similarly down here. So I think that this is a very fun set. Very autumn, but very, very fun. After shipping out all my sets of 6, I decided to do one more rainbow lasagna, but this time with 5 layers. And so I decided to omit one of the colors, and I removed the orange because from the time when at that Hanukkah I did the pan that was red, orange, and yellow, all the colors were a lot more similar. We got a lot more differences at the cooler blue-purple end of the rainbow, even though the green probably is going to completely take over. I pre-soaked all of these mini skeins overnight. We had 100 grams of yarn for each layer, layering on the color, working it through, adding more water as needed, and then continuing with our next layers. After I added all the yarn, I added some acid, and then heat this on the stove until we had a good 30 minutes of heat. Then I removed the yarn from the pan and washed all of it off camera. Now I wish that I did have one last set of our 6 mini skein sets to compare this to. This set of 5 colors is still very green heavy. Because I made sure to add more blue and purple, we have a lot more of those notes in here as well. And I feel like this is something that came from last time where it didn't feel like those blues and purples made as big of a difference. Both sets are really beautiful, and because of the variability of how much dye you add on each layer, how much that can shift the way colors go and how much water you have at various stages, I don't think it's the absence of orange that is making this set of 5 way more cool toned. I think it's because I made an effort to add a lot more blue and purple and bringing those cool toned notes into the equation. But either way, I adore how bird-like, how floral this turned out. If you got yarn from night 1, I am so curious to find out if you got a set of 6 mini skeins or a set of 5 mini skeins. I had shipped out all the sets of 6 before I dyed another round of this, so I didn't even label any of the mini skein packages, whether it was 120 grams or 100 grams, because at one point it was fairly obvious that everything from night 1 had 6. But now there are sets that have 5. And I do think I learned from the first set that I needed to add so much more of that purple and blue. And our second set definitely has more of that cooler section of the rainbow than the first one did. And I don't think it's just because I omitted the orange. I had so much fun putting this project together, and experiments like this are really possible because of your support. So please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss any videos. And this week is a very special week because every night we have a new yarn dyeing video. We have 3 more nights of mini skeins, bonus yarn dyeing, and a vlog, and so you don't want to miss any of it. Now, if you want to support the content on another level, go and check out the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I do have mini skeins of yarn from this series left, and I can't guarantee any particular night, but you can go see and pick the yarn base that you want, and you can always reach out and ask if I have anything specifically from night 1, but no guarantees. You can find links to everything down in the video description. And I still have sock blanks and bonus skeins available, lots of mystery things for you to unbox, and there's fun extras, and so everything is just so much fun. Now, tonight's video is probably the longest. I haven't edited the others yet, but I think tonight's is the longest. But I will see you back here tomorrow night starting at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time for the premiere, where I will be hanging out in the live chat room to react to the video, answer questions, and just in general hang out with all of you while we wait to see what I dyed up for night 2. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.